Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see everybody's returned. So, we're going to move on to the next section called Neurodiversity and the Social Model. Okay, to date, the vast majority of what's been said about autistic people is grounded in the idea that autistic differences are deficits. Autistic people are seen as defective versions of non autistic people who should strive to become more like non autistic people who make up 99% of the population. Some have even suggested that being autistic is a disease, which makes autistic people less human. Such ideas have underpinned autism research from its infancy in the 1940s. Since the early 90s, however, autistic advocates have been challenging these assumptions and asking others to understand being autistic as being a different way of being, which should be respected. A key moment for early autistic self advocacy was Jim Sinclair's Don't Mourn for Us speech in 1993, which asked for parents to stop mourning the loss of the non autistic child they thought they would have. So, this full speech can be found here. I'm going to click on this link and we will maybe read it after this section. Sinclair argued that autism should be understood from within the autistic perspective, and in the years since, a great number of people have lobbied to have autistic people seen as different rather than defective. This has evolved into the neurodiversity movement, a disability rights movement which sees being autistic and other forms of neurodivergence as part of natural human diversity. So you can see the old model is seeing the individual as the problem. The individual is impaired, the individual is the problem. The focus of the medical profession is to cure or alleviate the effect of the impairment. That is the old way of looking at things. And this is the new way. It's the idea that society causes the disability. Society causes barriers. So here you see the social barriers are attitudes, prejudice, stereotyping, discrimination, environments being inaccessible, language being inaccessible, buildings being inaccessible, services being inaccessible, communication being inaccessible, organizations being inflexible in their procedures and practices. Now, this is very vague, but I think everyone who has an experience of autism can understand. Proponents of the neurodiversity movement see being autistic as disabling within the social model of disability. The social model describes how people are disabled not by the disability itself, but how people and the environment around the disabled person fail to accommodate their needs. This is in contrast to the medical model of disability, which views disability as a problem situated within the person which should be treated. There are times when it's necessary to use the medical model in order to access diagnostic services or specialized support. Many autistic people prefer the social model and describe how many of their difficulties are caused not by being autistic itself, but by external things such as the sensory environment not being uh, proper or lack of appropriate support. It should be noted that not all autistic people consider themselves disabled. Rethink our beliefs about autistic people and apply the social model in practice. Here's a quote: I don't suffer from autism. I suffer from others' ignorance, prejudice, and ableism. Some people will be horrified or insulted by the idea that we should see being autistic as anything but a terrible tragedy. These people have no knowledge about autism. Many autistic people and those supporting them do experience great challenges, and it's important to recognize the distress caused by the challenges, and it's real. Support is needed. It may seem extremely difficult to suggest that people should accept autistic differences when their experiences have been overwhelmingly negative. Many people, including autistic people, blame autism for causing this distress, and in trying to improve their situation, believe that autism is something that we should be seeking a cure. Many autism organizations also reinforce the idea of autism as a tragedy when they fundraise or advertise autism treatments. However, seeing autistic people in the context of the medical model of disability, where it is the autism that is the problem that needs to be fixed, is very limiting. Being autistic is not something which can be cured or reduced. On the other hand, if we reconsider our understanding of autistic people in the context of the social model, where the problem is a societal one, it opens up many enabling ways of changing things around the autistic person. For example, when an autistic person is distressed by a sensory experience, it's not helpful and may be harmful to try and change the autistic person, such as by exposing them to more sensory distress in the hopes that they may become desensitized to it. We can, however, make changes to their environment which reduce or avoid this distress, such as using ear defenders or avoiding going to shops when it's very busy. Society is slowly making changes, such as having quiet hours for autistic people in some shops. In other contexts, such as distress caused by social communication differences, it's still possible to apply the social model. We now know that as much as autistic people find it difficult to understand non-autistic people, it's also the case that non-autistic people often struggle to understand autistic people. This is known as the double empathy problem, and it's described further in the next step and later in the course. Applying the social model does not mean that autistic people should not be supported to learn how to navigate the world, which is predominantly non-autistic. For example, in a situation where distress is caused by miscommunication, where an autistic person has taken something literally, we might try to teach the person about what the other person intended to communicate. This might be helpful so that there's a greater understanding in the future. We could also teach the other person that autistic people may take things literally and that communication partners of autistic people might try adapting their communication. Much like you would adapt your language to somebody who speaks a different language. Changing the narrative. It's sometimes argued that positivity about being autistic is only relevant to autistic people who are privileged by being more able to engage with such ideas. However, as we've explored earlier, the way we think about and describe autistic people influence the way they are treated. Too many autistic children only hear about being autistic in terms of negative experiences. The continued use of deficit-based ideas about autism tells autistic people that they are defective non-autistics. Here they're sharing a story of why this is harmful. I'm going to open the link and we'll read it in a moment. Many autistic people want to change the narrative. See, for example, flip the narrative on Twitter and believe that seeing the positives of being autistic, or at least seeing being autistic as being a more neutral, will help many autistic people avoid the distress caused by stigma and discrimination. Okay, I'm going to read this for you. Don't Mourn for Us. It was published in the Autism Network International newsletter, Our Voice, Volume 1, Number 3. It's an outline of the presentation Jim gave at the 1993 International Conference on Autism in Toronto, and it's addressed primarily to parents. Parents often report that learning that their child is autistic was the most traumatic thing that ever happened to them. Non-autistic people see autism as a great tragedy, and parents experience continuing disappointment and grief at all stages of their child's and family's life cycle. But this grief does not stem from the child's autism itself. It's a grief over the loss of the normal child the parents had hoped and expected to have. Parents' attitudes and expectations and the discrepancies between what parents expect of children at a particular age and their own children's actual development cause more stress and anguish than the practical complexities of life with an autistic person. Some amount of grief is natural as parents adjust to the fact that an event and a relationship they've been looking forward to isn't going to materialize. But this grief over a fantasized normal child needs to be separated from the parents' perceptions of the child they do have. The autistic child who needs the support of adult caretakers who can form very meaningful relationships with those caretakers if given the opportunity. Continuing focus on the child's autism as a source of grief is damaging both for the parents and for the child, and precludes the development of accepting an authentic relationship between them. For their own sake and for the sake of their children, I argue parents to make radical changes in their preconceptions of what autism means. I invite you to look at our autism and look at your grief from our perspective. Autism is not an appendage. Autism isn't something a person has or a shell that a person is trapped inside. There's no normal child hidden beneath the autism. Autism is a way of being. It is pervasive. It colors every experience, every sensation, perception, thought, emotion, and encounter. Every aspect of existence. It's not possible to separate the autism from the person. And if it were possible, the person you'd have left would not be the same person you started with. That is important, so take a moment to consider it. Autism is a way of being. It's not possible to separate the person from the autism. Therefore, when a child says, I wish my child didn't have autism, what they're really saying is, I wish the autistic child I had did not exist and I had a different non-autistic child instead. Read that again. Therefore, when parents say, I wish my child did not have autism, what they're really saying is, I wish the autistic child I did have did not exist, and I had a different non-autistic child instead. This is what we hear when you mourn over our existence. This is what we hear when you pray for our cure. This is what we know when you tell us of your fondest hopes and dreams for us. That your greatest wish is that one day we will cease to be, and strangers you can love will move in behind our faces. Autism is not an impenetrable wall. You try to relate to your autistic child, and the child does not respond. He doesn't see you. You can't reach her. There's no getting through. That's the hardest thing to deal with, isn't it? The only thing is, it isn't true. Look at it again. You try to relate as a parent to a child using your understanding of normal children. Your own feelings about parenthood, your own experiences and intuitions about relationships, and the child doesn't respond in the way you recognize as being part of that system. That does not mean the child is incapable of relating at all. It only means you're assuming a shared system, a shared understanding of signals and meanings that the child, in fact, does not share. It's as if you tried to have an intimate conversation with someone who has no comprehension of your language. Of course, the person won't understand what you're talking about, won't respond the way you expect, and may well find the whole interaction confusing and unpleasant. It takes more work to communicate with someone whose native language isn't the same as yours. And autism goes deeper than language and culture. Autistic people are foreigners in any society. You're going to have to give up your assumptions about shared meanings. You're going to have to learn to back up to levels more basic than you've probably thought about before, to translate, to check, to make sure your translations are understood. You're going to have to give up the certainty that comes of being on your own familiar territory, of knowing you're in charge, and let your child teach you a little of her language, guide you a little way into his world. And the outcome, if you succeed, will not be a normal parent child relationship. Your autistic child may learn to talk, may attend regular classes in school, may go to college, drive a car, live independently, have a career, but will never relate to you as other children relate to they will never relate to you as other children relate to their parents. Or your autistic child may never speak, may never graduate from a self-contained special education classroom to a sheltered activity program or residential facility, may need lifelong, full-time care and supervision, but is not completely beyond your reach. The ways we relate are different. Push for the things your expectations tell you are normal, and you'll find frustration, disappointment, resentment, maybe even rage and hatred. Approach respectfully, without preconceptions, and with openness to learning new things, and you'll find a world you could never have imagined. Yes, that takes more work than relating to non-autistic people, but it can be done, unless non-autistic people are far more limited than we are in their capacity to relate. We spend our entire lives doing it, each of us who does learn to talk to you, each of us who manages to function at all in your society, each of us who manages to reach out and make a connection with you is operating in alien territory, making contact with alien beings. We spend our entire lives doing this, and then you tell us that we can't relate. Autism is not death. Granted, Autism isn't what most parents expected or looked forward to when they anticipate the arrival of a child. What they expect is a child who will be like them, who will share their world and relate to them without requiring intensive on the job training and alien contact. Even if their child has some disability other than autism, parents expect to be able to relate to that child on the terms that seem normal to them. And in most cases, even allowing for the limitations of various disabilities, it is possible to form the kind of bond the parents had been looking forward to. But not when the child's autistic. Much of the grieving parents do is over the non occurrence of the expected relationship with an expected normal child. This grief is very real and it needs to be expected and worked through so people can get on with their lives. But it has nothing to do with autism. What it comes down to is what you expected, something that was tremendously important to you, and you looked forward to it with great joy and excitement. And maybe for a while, you thought you actually had it. And then perhaps gradually, perhaps abruptly, you had to recognize that the thing you looked forward to hasn't happened. It isn't going to happen. No matter how many other normal children you have, nothing will change the fact that this time, the child you waited and hoped and planned and dreamed for didn't arrive. This is the same thing that parents experience when a child is stillborn or when they have their baby to hold for a short time, only to have it die in infancy. It isn't about autism, it's about shattered expectations. I suggest that the best place to address these issues is not in organizations devoted to autism, but in parental bereavement counseling and support groups. In those settings, parents can learn to come to terms with their loss, not to forget about it, but to let it be in the past where the grief doesn't hit them in the face every waking moment of their lives. They learn to accept that their child is gone forever and won't be coming back. Most importantly, they learn not to take out their grief for their lost child on their surviving children. This is of critical importance. When one of these surviving children arrived at a time a child is being mourned for dead. But you don't lose a child to autism. You lost a child because the child you waited for never came into existence. That isn't the fault of the autistic child, who does exist, and it shouldn't be our burden. We need and deserve families who can see us and value us for ourselves, not families whose visions for us is obscured by ghosts of children who never lived. Grieve if you must for your own lost dreams, but don't mourn for us. We are alive, we are real, and we are here waiting for you. This is what I think autism society should be about. Not mourning for what never was, but exploration of what is. We need you. We need your help and your understanding. Your world is not very open to us, and we won't make it without your strong support. Yes, there is tragedy that comes with autism, but not because of what we are, but because of the things that happen to us, because society doesn't accept us. Be sad about that. If you want to be sad about something, better than being sad about it, though, get mad about it and then do something about it. The tragedy is not that we're here, but that your world has no place for us to be. How can it be otherwise? As long as our parents are still grieving over having brought us into the world. Take a look at your autistic child sometime and take a moment to tell yourself who that child is not. Think of yourself. This is not my child that I expected and planned for. This is not the child I waited for through all those moments of pregnancy and all those hours of labor. This is not the child I made all those plans to share all those experiences with. That child never came. This is not that child. Then go do whatever grieving you need to do. Go away from the autistic child and start learning to let go. After you've started that letting go, come back and look at your autistic child again and say to yourself, this is not my child that I expected and planned for. This is an alien child who landed on my life by accident. I don't know who this child is or will become, but I know it's a child stranded in an alien world without parents of its own to care for it. It needs someone to care for it, to teach it, to interpret, to advocate for it. And because this alien child happened to drop into my life, that job is mine if I want it. If that prospect excites you, then come join us in strength and determination, in hope and in joy. The adventure of a lifetime is ahead of you. I found that very emotional to read. As a parent of autistic children, and also as somebody who has ADHD and Tourette's, I identify completely with everything that this autistic person has said. I too feel totally alienated. I too have felt totally rejected from my parents, as if I could never be the person that they wanted me to be. I completely identify with this, both as a neurodivergent person and as a parent of children with autism. I feel so happy that I never looked at my children this way. I never ever wished my children's autism away. Do I wish society to accept my autistic children? Yes. Do I want my autistic children to grow up and have opportunities in this society? Yes. Never once did I think, I wish my children don't have autism. Never once. Because I like people with autism.